This has been an incredibly busy hour alone in the Roy Moore story. There are brand new accusations that are breaking here late in the evening on the East Coast against the Alabama Republican Senate candidate who remains, as Rachel just mentioned, the Senate candidate for the GOP, Roy Moore. His new message tonight, defiant. He says, "Dear Mitch McConnell, bring it on." And we are also learning that the last chance to force Moore out came and went. This reporting that, again, I was just discussing with Rachel. This Republican steering committee is basically the only entity with the power to effectively cancel the party nomination there, and they declined to do so. Also, tonight, Roy Moore releasing this letter where he goes further than he has before. He says, quote, "I adamantly deny the allegations of Lee Corfman and Beverly Nelson. I did not date underage girls," he says in the letter. And he goes on to say he's taken steps to begin a civil action for defamation related to those allegations. Now, the statement, of course, comes just a couple hours shy of this so-called 24-hour deadline that Fox News host Sean Hannity gave Moore last night. Moore not the only one speaking out, though, before that self-declared deadline. This is the other part of this story tonight. New women who are going on the record against Roy Moore, accusing him of some of the same types of behavior and patterns that the earlier accounts also alleged. Gina Richardson telling the Washington Post tonight, this just breaking, that when she was a 17-year-old high school senior, she was working at Sears, Moore asked for her phone number. And she says, given that request, she didn't give it to him. But then, get this, she alleges that a few days later, she was sitting in trigonometry class at Gadsden High School and was summoned to the principal's office over the intercom in the classroom. And she was told she had a phone call. "I said hello," Richardson recalled, and the male voice on the other end of the line said, "Gina, this is Roy Moore." "I was like, what?" she recounted, and he said, "What are you doing?" "I said, I'm in trig class." Gina Richardson goes on to allege that she eventually did go out with him and that the date ended, quote, in a dark parking lot behind Sears, giving her what she called an unwanted and forceful kiss that left her scared. "I never wanted to see him again," Richardson tells the Washington Post. Another woman, Tina Johnson, telling another major Alabama publication, AL.com, late today, the article went up and said that she was 28 years old. And she went to Roy Moore's law office. She was signing over custody of her 12-year-old son. This was to her mother. It was 1991. Roy Moore, married at the time. And in this accusation, Johnson says that during this appointment, again, in the law office, she alleges that he flirted with her, that he called her pretty, and then as she got up to leave, quote, she said Moore came up behind her, and it was at that point she recalls that he grabbed her buttocks. "He didn't pinch it, he grabbed it," she tells the Washington Post, and was so surprised, she recounts that she didn't say anything at the time. Now, when asked why she and some of these other accusers did not come forward sooner, a part of this story we've been covering, this was Tina Johnson's response, new tonight. "It's because somebody asked. If anybody had asked, we would have told it. No one asked. No one asked." People are asking now. That's a big part of this story. Now, as always, we're obligated to tell you all sides of this story. This is what the Moore campaign is telling the Post about this tonight. Quote, "If you are a liberal and hate Judge Moore, apparently he groped you. If you are conservative and love Judge Moore, you know these allegations are a political farce." This afternoon, one of Moore's lawyers also sought to discredit one of the accusers, Beverly Young Nelson, who had alleged in that press conference with Gloria Allred that Roy Moore sexually assaulted her at the age of 16. This lawyer, late today, was questioning her credibility as well as the authenticity of the yearbook message that she alleges Roy Moore wrote to her.
Release the yearbook so that we can determine, is it genuine or is it a fraud?
Now, that was a request for one piece of evidence here, this yearbook. But we have to tell you that press conference did not even include, from that lawyer, denials of the other accusers at the time in this fast-moving story. 5 then, and since that press conference ended, by our count, 4 more accusers have come out alleging some kind of misconduct. Now, despite Roy Moore's defiance about not backing down, national Republicans in D.C. continue to try to distance themselves from this entire situation. That includes his own senior Alabama senator, Republican Richard Shelby. Now, he's saying now he won't vote for Moore and he'll instead write in the name of what he calls a distinguished Republican. That's when he votes in this election scheduled 27 days from now. Also, a new poll that has now been leaked. This is from a Republican source. This is the National Republican Senatorial Committee. And that poll from those Republicans, whatever firm practiced it, has Democrat Doug Jones up in this race now by 12 points. The NRSC pulled its support of Roy Moore last week, and it isn't sharing the rest of the poll with us or the name of the firm who conducted it. We have to tell you that because, of course, it raises questions about their agenda in releasing those numbers, which are clearly bad for Roy Moore. So where does all of this leave the nation's top Republican?
Thank you all.
Should Roy Moore resign, Mr. President? Do you believe his accusers? Do you believe the accusers of Roy Moore, Mr. President? Should he resign?
Joining me now is Joyce Vance, a former U.S. attorney for the Northern District of Alabama. She's also a professor at the University of Alabama School of Law. David Frum, a senior editor for The Atlantic and a former Bush White House aide, as well as Shelby Holliday, who covers politics for the Wall Street Journal. And we have some more news coming into our newsroom because Sean Hannity has just spoken out about this. I want to play that in a moment, but first, before we go to that and the way he's inserted himself in this story, Joyce, I want to go to you on the facts, the ethics, and the allegations as they stand. Your view of what we're learning tonight.
So each additional piece of information, I think, just drives an additional nail into Judge Moore's coffin. Something that I look for as these women come forward is whether they told someone else about an alleged incident close in time. And tonight in the Washington Post story, we have Miss Richardson, who tells her friend who she works with in the mall about Moore's forceful kiss, what she describes as a forceful, unwanted kiss. At the same time that it happens, the friend helps her avoid Moore from that point on. These are the kind of details that really bring into focus the authenticity and the truthfulness of these women who come forward.
You're noting that in the alternative theory of the case, the denial from Moore, what we read tonight here, where he says, oh, well, this is just political people setting him up, that the contemporaneous validation of these women talking to other people at the time suggests that it would have to be a far more elaborate conspiracy, that it's not just them with a fake axe to grind under this conspiracy theory, but that also they'd have to loop in a lot of other people who want to also join in and make some sort of fake story from years ago.
Exactly that. And then there's an additional woman who's quoted in this news story. She identifies herself as a Democrat, says she worked behind a counter, and Moore kept asking her out, and he was persistent, and it made her uncomfortable. And what I take away from that piece of the Washington Post article is, if this woman, a Democrat, really for political reasons had it in for Moore, she would have made up a much worse story than he kept pestering me, he made me uncomfortable. So again, I think we have these guarantees of truthfulness in what information these women are talking about at this point in time.
Yeah, David, I wonder if you would speak to that point that Joyce raises, which is there are allegations of what would be at the time sex crimes here. There are allegations of unwanted contact and contact with people below the legal age to consent in Alabama. But there are other allegations that, according to these women, are not necessarily sex crimes, are simply allegations that go to the overwhelming circumstantial evidence, in addition, that this was a pattern of behavior for former Judge Moore.
It's a pattern of behavior. One of the allegations, interestingly, took place after Judge Moore's marriage. I mean, there has been, I think, a failure to reckon with just how deep and wide a pattern this is. Look, the very first story we heard about Ms. Korfman, I mean, that Judge Moore had this very deft ability to separate a young girl from her mother, to reassure the mother. He was good at it. And that's just a long pattern and practice. And, of course, that doesn't stop with the mere fact that a man gets married. It doesn't stop with the fact that a man is on the highest court in his state dispensing justice, including criminal sanctions to other people. And I think one of the things that is so disturbing about this case is the nature, not just the nature of the job that Roy Moore is now seeking, but the nature of the job that he had in Alabama as that state's highest law enforcement, highest official of justice.
Well, you mentioned that. Let's read from some of that because it's getting new scrutiny, his record as a judge here. Chief Justice of Alabama's Supreme Court. He twice argued against the rape shield law, basically saying it should not shield people who were alleged victims of sexual assault. Cases between 2013 and 2016, more dissenting from what was the majority opinion from, by the way, fairly conservative justices, where he sided instead with alleged offenders to try to dig up negative information about the alleged victims. That's part of the record, Shelby. There's a lot to know about ex-Judge Moore before you even get into the allegations of his personal conduct.
Right.
Then there is what you and I were discussing when you walked right into this newsroom, which is the odd way that Sean Hannity has inserted himself, initially as some sort of arbiter or referee of Republican politics, which may ring true to people who see him as strictly a member of the Republican political class.
Right.
And then he seems to be backing off that in a much vaunted, self-promoted role tonight. Take a listen, and then for your response, Sean Hannity tonight.
I am very confident that when everything comes out, they will make the best decision for their state. It shouldn't be decided by me, by people on television, by Mitch McConnell, Washington, talk show hosts, news people.
Shelby.
That's a perfectly fair point. I'll say that I watched most of Sean's show tonight just to see what his response would be. He set this 24-hour time limit for Judge Roy Moore. Despite what he just said there, he spent much of the show saying the overarching theme was we believe the women. He talked about Bill Clinton's accusers. He brought in all of these other political topics. You could say that they were using women as pawns, but honestly, the overarching theme was we believe the women and everybody else should believe the women too. So it doesn't sound like Sean Hannity's on Roy Moore's side right now. He also talked a lot about his 16-year-old daughter and how he's sickened by the idea of older men approaching younger women. I just think this really points to the fact that not only has this news story tonight helped establish the pattern that was already established in previous stories, but it also completely shifted the narrative away from this signature issue. Roy Moore's campaign held this event today to talk about the yearbook signature. It had the press going and looking up his past signatures and looking at different forms that he signed. And now we're back to these allegations that establish a pattern that bothers voters. It bothers conservative media. It clearly bothers a lot of Republicans in the Senate. I mean, Judge Roy Moore never had Mitch McConnell, but he's lost endorsements. He's lost Richard Shelby's vote. At this point, it doesn't seem to be much about the party or political beliefs. It's all about Roy Moore, and he has given no sign that he is willing to step down or withdraw.
Well, and David, let me get your response to that. Shelby raises this important point that we may be seeing the ceiling or the limits of this Bannon fake news, everyone else is lying defense. There was a lot of effort in the press conference today to make it about the yearbook and handwriting analysis, and they said we need a neutral arbiter to get, it was like a lot of sideshow. I also want to play for you for your response to this and the lawyer for Roy Moore, who also tried to go to another dog whistle with our own anchor Ali Velshi and Stephanie Rule. Take a look at this.
Why would he need permission from any of these girls' mothers if they weren't underage?
Sure, that's a good question. And culturally speaking, I would say there's differences. I looked up Ali's background there. Wow, that's awesome that you have got such a diverse background. It's really cool to read through that. But point is this:
what does Ali's
each culture
background have to do with dating a 14-year-old?
I'm not finished with the context of it.
Well, please answer. What does Ali Velshi's background have to do with dating children, 14-year-old girls?
Sure. In other countries, there's arrangement through parents for what we would refer to as consensual marriage. So
Ali's from Canada.
I understand that. And Ali's also spent time in other countries, of which I've gone to. So it's not a bad thing.
I don't know where you're going with this, Trent.
David, respond to any and all of the above.
Well, this is why you should always pay your legal bills, because if you don't get quality help. But I have to dissent from this idea that this story is a Roy Moore story. That lurking in the background, of course, is the problem that the President of the United States is very credibly alleged to have done not to have laid hands on minors in the way that Roy Moore is so credibly alleged to have done, to have barged in on them and to have engaged in sexual activities with to voyeuristically violated the privacy of the contestants in his underage beauty contests. That's always there. I mean, if it's true that if there is a number of credible accusations that prove something where and overwhelm the denial, everyone is thinking this is about the president. And one more thing, if we get to the point where Roy Moore is elected and the Senate does act to remove him, that drama of removal also puts thoughts in people's head. If removal from the Senate is a response to credible accusations of sexual abuse, why is the president left in place by that same Senate. Donald Trump knows that, the people around him know that, and that is why this thing resonates as much more than a merely local story.
You know, I've been immersed in some of this story. Joyce, I haven't heard anyone put it quite as directly as David just did.
But that's exactly where this story goes. You know, in 2016, Donald Trump asked Americans to hire him to be president, and they said yes. Now, with a very similar set of accusations to the ones that emerged on the Access Hollywood tape, we can talk about whether underage girls are involved in the precise nature of the allegations. But Roy Moore is now asking the people of Alabama to hire him. And if the people of Alabama hold the line, what that might portend for Donald Trump, I think, is very frightening to Republicans and to party establishment.
Well, and that's why I've been talking to a lot of legal experts, and they say that it sounds maybe appealing that Republicans in the Senate say that, oh, well, if Judge Roy Moore wins this election, we will expel him. But it's a much trickier thing to do when it actually comes to that, because to overturn the will of voters who knew these allegations before they cast their ballots, who knowingly elected this man, given all of his controversial past, you know, as you referred to earlier, Ari, he was a controversial candidate in the primaries, and voters knew that, and they continue to vote for him. Overturning the will of the voters would set a very tremendous precedent for the U.S. Senate.
Right. It's not as easy as some of the Washington Republicans are trying to present it now, and that may be why they are searching so desperately for an escape hatch to not have the problem. You just laid out the problem that David laid out. David, stay with me. I'm going to see you later in the show. Shelby Holliday and Joyce Vance, thank you both. This has been an incredibly busy hour alone in the Roy Moore story. There are brand new accusations that are breaking here late in the evening on the East Coast against the Alabama Republican Senate candidate who remains, as Rachel just mentioned, the Senate candidate for the GOP, Roy Moore. His new message tonight, defiant. He says, "Dear Mitch McConnell, bring it on." And we are also learning that the last chance to force Moore out came and went. This reporting that, again, I was just discussing with Rachel. This Republican steering committee is basically the only entity with the power to see him again, Richardson tells the Washington Post. Another woman, Tina Johnson, telling another major Alabama publication, AL.com, late today, the article went up and said that she was 28 years old. And she went to Roy Moore's law office. She was signing over custody of her 12-year-old son. This was to her mother. It was 1991. Roy Moore, married at the time. And in this accusation, Johnson says that during this appointment, again, in the law office, she alleges that he flirted with her, that he called her pretty, and then as she got up to leave, quote, she said Moore came up behind her, and it was to effectively cancel the party nomination there, and they declined to do so. Also, tonight, Roy Moore releasing this letter where he goes further than he has before. He says, quote, "I adamantly deny the allegations of Lee Korfman and Beverly Nelson. I did not date underage girls," he says in the letter. And he goes on to say he's taken steps to begin a civil action for defamation related to those allegations. Now, the statement, of course, comes just a couple hours shy of this so-called 24-hour deadline that Fox News host Sean Hannity gave Moore last night. Geometry class at Gadsden High School, and was summoned to the principal's office over the intercom in the classroom. And she was told she had a phone call. "I said hello," Richardson recalled, and the male voice on the other end of the line said, "Gina, this is Roy Moore." "I was like, what?" she recounted, and he said, "What are you doing?" "I said, I'm in trig class." Gina Richardson goes on to allege that she eventually did go out with him, and that the date ended, quote, in a dark parking lot behind Sears, giving her what she called an unwanted and forceful kiss that left her scared. "I never wanted more," not the only one speaking out, though, before that self-declared deadline. This is the other part of this story tonight. New women who are going on the record against Roy Moore, accusing him of some of the same types of behavior and patterns that the earlier accounts also alleged. Gina Richardson telling the Washington Post tonight, this just breaking, that when she was a 17-year-old high school senior, she was working at Sears, Moore asked for her phone number. And she says, given that request, she didn't give it to him. But then, get this, she alleges that a few days later, she was sitting in trigonometry